The most dangerous moment with a narcissist isn't the shouting, the attack, or the moment they throw you away. It is the moment they suddenly go quiet. It feels like the lights went out in a room you were still standing in. One second, you were the center of their world. The next, they treat you like you never existed at all. Stay with me here. This part matters more than the rest. When a narcissist does this one thing, they are not coming back. Not to explain, not to apologize, not even to hurt you again. Most people never see it coming until it is already done. If this hits home, if you have felt that eerie quiet and wondered why it pained you more than all the chaos before it, pause for a moment, take a breath, stay with this conversation. Understanding this exact moment is usually the turning point where your healing finally starts. When they are done, the bond ends inside them, but the illusion finally breaks inside you. That is not weakness, that is waking up. When a narcissist is genuinely finished with you, there is no explosion, no dramatic exit, no final argument that gives you clarity. That loud, fiery discard people brace for is actually a sign of unfinished business. Rage, insults, blocking, smear campaigns, sudden withdrawals, these are all emotional behaviors, and emotional behavior means attachment still lives somewhere inside them. When they are truly done, the shift is quieter and far more unsettling. It feels like the lights dimmed in a room you were still standing in. One minute you were central to their focus. The next, you are treated as if you never mattered. This quiet exit happens for a reason. The narcissist no longer sees a return on emotional investment. You no longer provoke reactions they can feed on. Maybe you stopped engaging. Maybe you stopped explaining yourself. Maybe you stopped defending. Maybe you simply stopped supplying the emotional intensity they feed off. At that point, confrontation becomes inefficient. Drama costs energy, and narcissists conserve energy when the payoff disappears. Silence here is not maturity, it is disengagement. What makes this especially destabilizing is that the narcissist does not announce this departure. There is no closure conversation because closure would require emotional acknowledgement. Instead, contact fades or stops cold, messages go unanswered, familiar rhythms vanish. You are not told what changed because from their side, nothing needs explaining. They have already emotionally relocated. That is why people often feel more confused in this phase than they did during the open abuse. Your mind keeps scanning for meaning, hunting for a final clue, looking for something to respond to. But there is nothing out there to push against. That absence creates self-doubt. You start questioning whether you imagined the connection, whether you ever mattered, whether you did something unforgivable. That confusion is not accidental, it is the natural byproduct of being discarded without any narrative at all. Detachment is far more final than rage, insults, or even a dramatic discard. Rage still contains connection. Anger is emotional engagement. Yelling, blaming, threatening, punishing. All of that means the narcissist is still invested in your reaction. They still want to be seen, felt, feared, or validated. Even cruelty demands attention. When a narcissist is angry with you, you still matter in their internal world. You still occupy space. You still have the power to move their emotional state. And that power is exactly what kept the dynamic alive. Detachment is something else entirely. Detachment means you no longer register as emotionally relevant. Your pain does not activate them. Your silence does not provoke them. Your presence does not energize them. This is not growth. This is not healing on their part. It is psychological withdrawal. They have shut down the emotional channel entirely because it no longer serves them. Where rage says you hurt me or you challenge my control, detachment quietly says you are no longer worth emotional investment. That is why detachment feels colder and more destabilizing than abuse. Abuse gives your nervous system something to react to. Detachment gives it nothing. The human brain is wired to seek resolution through interaction, even painful interaction. When that interaction disappears, the bond does not instantly dissolve. It lingers unanswered. You replay conversations, you search for meaning, you wait for a response that never comes. Meanwhile, the narcissist has already emotionally exited. Detachment also protects their fragile self-image. Rage risks exposure. Arguments can reveal cracks. Detachment dodges accountability altogether. By disengaging emotionally, they skip reflection, remorse, and repair. They never have to admit wrongdoing if they simply stop caring. This lets them move on without ever facing the harm they caused, rewriting the whole relationship as insignificant rather than failed. For the person left behind, this emotional cutoff can feel like an eraser. Not because the connection lacked meaning, but because it carried meaning on only one side in any sustainable way. Indifference is the true ending. It signals the complete absence of emotional investment. Cruelty, manipulation, even abandonment still carry emotional charge. They are active behaviors that demand attention, intention, and engagement. Indifference asks for none of that. When a narcissist becomes indifferent, you no longer serve a psychological function in their inner world. You are not someone to dominate, punish, impress, or pull emotion from. You are simply irrelevant. That is why indifference feels so dehumanizing. Human beings are wired to measure connection through emotional response. Even negative attention confirms you exist. Indifference denies it. When a narcissist reaches this stage, they do not try to win arguments, defend their actions, or reshape how you see them. They stop caring about your perception because your perception no longer matters. Your feelings, your confusion, even your pain no longer register as meaningful input. Indifference also explains the sudden emotional flatness people describe. There is no anger to react to, no warmth to chase, no tension to resolve. Communication, if it exists at all, becomes mechanical or simply vanishes. The warmth that once hooked you is gone. The hostility that once terrified you is also gone. What is left is emotional emptiness, and that is not peace. It is absence. For many survivors, this phase triggers a deeper grief than the abuse itself. Abuse lets you believe the bond still had emotional substance, even when that substance was toxic. Indifference forces you to face the fact that the emotional reciprocity you were fighting for never really existed. The bond you felt was real to you, but it was conditional and replaceable to them. Indifference also serves a protective purpose for the narcissist. It blocks introspection. Caring, even negatively, could lead to guilt, shame, or responsibility. Indifference slams those doors shut. By emotionally nullifying you, they can move forward without integrating what they did or how it affected you. This is exactly why chasing explanations in this phase only deepens the wound. You are seeking meaning from someone who has already emotionally exited. The lack of response is the response. Indifference is not a stage to push through. It is the psychological endpoint. And recognizing that truth, as painful as it is, often marks the start of reclaiming your own emotional reality. Narcissists do not stop engaging because they suddenly developed insight or emotional maturity. They stop because they have secured replacement supply. This is one of the hardest things to accept because it kills the hope that their silence means reflection, remorse, or growth. In reality, their emotional system is transactional. When one source stops producing admiration, validation, obedience, or emotional intensity, they redirect their attention elsewhere. The shift can look abrupt from the outside, but internally it is often already underway. Replacement supply does not need to be better, healthier, or more compatible. It only needs to be new. Novelty gives stimulation. A fresh person has not yet set boundaries, challenged the story, or seen behind the mask. That makes them efficient. Once that new source is in place, the old one becomes unnecessary. This is exactly why the emotional cutoff feels so sudden. You are not being left because you failed. You are being left because you are no longer exploitable. In the same way, this replacement explains the chilling calm that follows. There is no longing, no processing, no grief on their end. Emotional energy has already been reassigned. While you are still metabolizing the loss, replaying moments, searching for meaning, they are mirroring someone new, telling a revised version of their story, and positioning themselves as unchanged and unaffected. The speed of this transition can feel like betrayal stacked on top of abandonment. What makes this especially destabilizing is that narcissists rarely announce this shift. There is no honest admission of moving on. Instead, you sense it through emotional absence, delayed responses, or sudden disinterest. If confronted, they deny it or minimize it because transparency would expose the mechanics of their behavior. Acknowledging replacement supply would force them to confront their pattern, and patterns threaten their self-image. This is also why trying to compete or prove your worth at this stage is so damaging. You are no longer in a relational dynamic. You are in a supply economy you never agreed to. Their departure is not a verdict on your value or your replaceability as a person. It is evidence of how they regulate themselves emotionally. Once the function you served gets outsourced, the attachment dissolves without ceremony. It leaves you to process an ending they already abandoned internally. Closure is never offered when a narcissist is truly finished, because closure requires recognition of impact, and recognition threatens their self-concept. To offer closure, they would have to admit that something real happened between you, that emotions were involved, and that their actions carried consequences. That level of acknowledgement introduces accountability, and accountability destabilizes the carefully constructed story they live inside. So instead of ending things with clarity, they end things with absence. That lack of closure is not accidental or careless, it is protective. By refusing to explain, discuss, or process the ending, the narcissist keeps psychological control even in disengagement. You are left holding unanswered questions while they walk away, unburdened. The imbalance continues, just in a quieter form. You are searching for meaning. They have already erased their need for it. People often mistake this silence for confusion or emotional overwhelm on the narcissist's side. In reality, it is avoidance. Conversations about endings invite reflection, and reflection invites shame. Rather than risk that internal discomfort, they opt out entirely. Messages go unanswered. Attempts to talk are ignored or met with vague, dismissive responses. The door is not slammed. It is left hanging open just enough to keep you suspended. This suspended state is deeply distressing because the human nervous system craves resolution. You may replay interactions, rewrite texts in your head, or imagine one final conversation that will make everything make sense. But closure from a narcissist is a contradiction. They are invested in protecting themselves, not in helping you heal. Any explanation they could give would be self-serving, distorted, or incomplete, and often more confusing than helpful. The absence of closure also gives them room to rewrite the story privately. Without a final conversation, there is no shared ending, only their version and your questions. They can minimize the relationship, deny its importance, or recast themselves as the reasonable one who simply moved on. You are left without a narrative anchor. That can make the loss feel unreal and invalidating. Understanding that closure will not come from them is a painful but necessary shift. The silence is not a puzzle to solve. It is the conclusion. The clarity you are seeking cannot be pulled from someone who refuses to emotionally acknowledge what happened. When you stop waiting for answers from them, you begin the slow work of generating your own meaning, grounded not in their absence, but in your own reality. Your confusion is not a personal failure or a sign that you are weak. It is evidence of psychological whiplash created by a sudden emotional disappearance. When a narcissist is done, the ending does not follow normal relational rules. There is no gradual distancing, no honest conversation, no mutual understanding. Instead, the emotional bond collapses without explanation, leaving your mind trying to reconcile two incompatible realities at once. That confusion shows up because the bond was built on inconsistency. Periods of attention, intimacy, or validation were followed by withdrawal, criticism, or distance. Your nervous system adapted to this unpredictability by staying on alert, scanning for patterns, and trying to anticipate their every shift. When the narcissist finally disengages completely, that system does not switch off. It keeps scanning for cues that no longer arrive. The silence becomes louder than any argument ever was. Many people mistake this confusion for lingering attachment or a failure to move on. In truth, it is the residue of emotional conditioning. You were trained to respond, to repair, to self-correct in order to restore connection. When there is no longer anything to respond to, your brain fills the gaps with self-doubt. You may wonder if you misread everything, if you imagined the closeness, or if you were somehow responsible for the abrupt ending. That questioning is not insight. It is disorientation. The narcissist, meanwhile, is not confused. Their clarity comes from emotional disengagement, not from understanding. They did not process the ending, they exited it. That asymmetry is what creates the imbalance. One person is left trying to make sense of a story that ended without a final chapter, while the other has already replaced the book itself. This is why your confusion often peaks after contact stops, not before. The absence of stimulation removes the familiar chaos that once kept you focused outward. Without it, the mind turns inward, hunting for coherence. But coherence cannot be found in a dynamic that was never built on emotional reciprocity in the first place. Recognizing that your confusion is a predictable response to an unnatural ending is crucial. It shifts the question from "what is wrong with me?" to "what happened to me?" That reframing is often the first step toward regaining psychological footing, because it places the confusion where it belongs, as a consequence of emotional abandonment, not as a reflection of your worth or perception. The silence that follows is not calm, mutual space, or emotional peace. It is deliberate. When a narcissist goes silent after being done with you, that silence serves a function. It lets them disengage without confrontation, avoid accountability, and keep a sense of control without actively exerting it. Silence becomes a strategy, not a reflection of inner stability. This strategic silence works because it shifts the emotional burden onto you. You are the one left holding the weight of the unanswered messages, the unanswered questions, and the absence where an explanation should be. That weight keeps you tied to the dynamic long after the narcissist has moved on internally. The very quiet that was meant to free them is what keeps you stuck, looping through the same memories, replaying the same conversations, and waiting for a turn that never comes. Recognizing this shifts everything. The silence was never about you, it was about them. And the moment you see that, the silence stops feeling like a verdict and starts looking like a reflection of who they are, not who you failed to be. This realization is where the true pivot toward freedom begins. When you stop viewing their silence as a mystery to solve or a punishment to endure, it loses its grip on your nervous system. You begin to understand that the void they left behind is not an indictment of your worth, but the ground upon which you reclaim yourself. They used silence to erase the relationship. You can use it to build a boundary they can never cross again. For a long time, the quiet feels heavy, like suffocating under the weight of unsaid words. But as the psychological whiplash subsides, the nature of that silence changes. It stops being an empty room where you wait for them to reappear and starts becoming a sanctuary where you can finally hear your own voice, the voice that was systematically drowned out by years of managing their emotional weather. The narcissist's departure feels like a profound loss, but it is actually the eviction of a ghost. The person you are grieving never existed in the way you believed they did. They were a mirror, reflecting your own capacity for love, empathy, and devotion back at you. When they walked away, they didn't take your value with them. They just stopped holding up the glass. The warmth, the depth, the capacity for deep connection, that was always yours. It lived inside you then, and it remains intact now. Waking up from this illusion is excruciating, but it is the only way out of the maze. You do not need their validation to close the chapter, nor do you need their confession to know that what you lived through was real. Your grief is proof of your humanity. Your confusion is proof of your capacity for genuine attachment. Now the work is to redirect that profound care back toward yourself. Let the silence be final. Let the unanswered questions remain unanswered. In the quiet they left behind, you are no longer waiting to be seen by someone who was blind to you. You are finally free to see yourself. The temptation to break that silence, to send one last text or demand the truth just one more time, will still knock at your door. It is a natural human instinct to want to balance the scales of justice when you have been profoundly wronged. But closure in this economy is self-authored. If you wait for them to provide the period at the end of the sentence, you will remain suspended in their unfinished paragraph forever. To heal, you must accept that the villain in your story will never walk back into the frame to admit they were the villain. In their rewritten narrative, they are either the victim of your alleged unstable behavior or the hero who walked away for their own peace. Let them keep the script. Their internal mythology is a fragile fortress built to keep out the one thing they cannot survive, the truth of who they are. Engaging with them to alter that script is like trying to paint a house while it's burning down. Instead, the finality of their indifference becomes your scaffolding. When someone shows you that you no longer exist to them, take them at their word. Do not knock on a door that has been bricked over from the inside. The silence is your answer. The lack of closure is your closure. It is a harsh, cold reality, but it is also an absolute truth you can finally plant your feet on. Unlike the shifting sands of their manipulation, this silence doesn't change day by day. It is a definitive boundary line. As you step across that line into your own life, the focus shifts entirely away from what they did and onto what you are going to do next. You begin the painstaking but deeply rewarding process of recentering your own reality. You start making choices based on what makes you feel safe, what brings you joy, and what restores you. The energy that was once entirely consumed by tracking their moods and predicting their weather patterns is slowly returned to your own reservoir. This is where the quiet stops feeling like a vacuum and starts feeling like space. Space to breathe without hypervigilance. Space to remember who you were before you minimized yourself to fit into the cramped corners of their transactional world. The ending they handed you was brutal, abrupt, and entirely devoid of grace. But the life you build out of the aftermath belongs completely to you. They have exited the room, the lights are back in your control, And for the first time in a long time, you get to decide what happens next.